Welcome back to another Tilted Nut video. In this video I'm going to build a cabinet for my computer case. I have an open case that's rather large and bulky. It doesn't fit well on the desk, it doesn't fit well on the floor. I rather like the setup on it. I like the room that I have to work with, so I have no plans on getting rid of it or moving to a different case just because of the capabilities of the room that I have with it. With that in mind, needing to keep it off the desk, keep it off the floor, being able to isolate it a little bit so that it is out of the way. My original plan was to integrate it into the desk and have it become part of the desk. But I've decided over the last year that that probably is going to be too much. And I need to cut down the bulk of the primary desk that I have planned, and building a standalone cabinet that'll go beside the desk I thought would be the best way to do this. The design that I came up with has changed multiple times over the last year, but I think I came up with something that is going to work long term and will provide me the additional storage capacity that I need for some of the accessories, some of the extra parts that I have, and will match what I have planned for the rest of the office furniture. But I hope you enjoy the video. We'll get into it, and I'll show you how I put this thing together.
As with any project, it always begins with cutting down the wood, cleaning up the edges, and getting it ready to use. The planks I have were run across the planer and joined here at school. And so all I had to do is just clean up one edge and get them cut down to a uniform width so that I can start putting together the planks. Once the edges were cleaned up, I can go ahead and start getting them cut down to the length that I need for each of the links and get this rustic walnut put together. Here I'm adjusting grain pattern on each of the planks to get the look that I think would look best together. Have less of a separation between the planks for the grain pattern, so it actually flows fairly reasonably and it looks like they actually belong together. And of course, you can't forget the glue up process. And with the boards glued together and clamped together, I'm going to let everything sit overnight and let the glue cure so I can actually start working on getting this put together. And of course, you have the glue cleanup, getting all the little boogers off and getting it so you can actually sand it and work with it as well. For the base of the cabinet, I decided I was going to dovetail the uh, corners. And right now I'm getting everything marked out. And for those of you who are paying attention, you'll notice something isn't quite right with the pattern that I'm laying out. And it took me quite a while to figure out that I had completely gotten these backwards and it wasn't going to work. With my table saw blade set to 8 degrees, I started getting the initial cut so that I have nice, uniform, clean cuts instead of doing this by hand and having things completely off on several of them. It just helps me keep everything a little more uniform. And during this process, for some reason, I was completely oblivious to the fact that these dovetails were not cut right, or the tails, pins. Um, yeah, it was completely off. I went through the entire process of getting everything cleaned up, getting all the joints nice and even, just to realize that this wasn't going to work. And about now is where I realized there was an issue. After adjusting fire, I turned these into finger joints or box joints and proceeded from there. With all the box joints cut, now I can get everything put together and start double checking the position for this shelf and get the dado for it cut so that I can be able to actually get this in position and get it secured. After cutting the dado for it's going to be a stopped dado for that top shelf, I'm able to actually start working on getting the tenon cut that's going to slip into the dado and figure out the alignment and final width for this top plank. At some point, I really do need to get the dado throat plate so I can actually use a dado stack for this instead of adjusting the saw blade by a saw width or part of it or whatever and do it that way. But with getting the dado cleaned up, getting the tenon cut so that the edges are hidden, I can be able to actually get this in place and have a nice snug fit. I've started making sure that all of the dados have a shoulder on them just to help hide any imperfections that might be in the dado or in the tenon that goes into the dado. And I would like to say that I got the width for this top piece perfect the first time, but this took me 6 different attempts to get the proper width on this so that it matched up for 90-degree angles for this primary box and getting it set in the cabinet. Here I'm just double checking the shelf that's going to be sitting at a 45-degree angle to make sure that I've got the measurement correct or close, because this is what the case is going to be sitting on. And now it's time to actually start the glue process on this. This turned out to be one of the more stressful projects that I've done because I wasn't entirely sure that the dimensions and measurements were going to work for what I wanted and the overall design was going to work. Obviously, when you're planning something like this, you have the ability to measure things out. You're not using weird angles. You're not using shelves at a 45-degree angle. You don't have an odd shaped computer case that you're trying to match to it. So this was a little more of a challenge for me, trying to get everything actually lined up, be the dimensions that I wanted, and make sure it was going to function the way I wanted it to. Now, during the time that I was working on this project, we also had an extreme jump in humidity, which helped affect the wood. None of it was completely straight like it should have been. I didn't have the ability to run these planks through a sander to try and even them out. So the best I could hope for was to get everything glued up, clamped together, and then use additional clamps to pull it into shape and pull it to where I needed to get the perfect 90-degree angles on the joints. I went ahead and added the 45-degree shelf off camera, got it clamped in place so that the entire thing can set overnight instead of having to wait another day or two before I continue working on this any further. Here I am getting a 45-degree angle cut into the maple that is going to be used for the base and for the trim on the bottom. This kind of ended up with the look that I wanted. I'm not completely in love with it, but it definitely worked, and I think it looks pretty good for what I ended up with in the end. Because I planned this to have a 1 inch difference in height between the corners of the board and the middle of the board, I used my jigsaw to clean out the middle of this part so that I can run it across the router and get it cleaned up. And I used a flush trim bit just to get everything nice and even. And here I'm using a 1/2 inch roundover bit to give a nice roundover profile on the trim for the bottom of this and be able to get it something a little bit different, but still keep it clean and fairly conservative. Initially, I thought about putting a 45-degree chamfer on this, but one of the test pieces I did, it just didn't quite look right. I didn't have any other profiles to work with for the router bit, and so I settled on the 1/2 inch roundover just because it's what I have to work with, and it was the closest that I could come up with for the look I was going for overall. And with all of those cleaned up, I can now start getting this put in place and start getting ready to start the sanding process. Decided to add a few brad nails to the bottom of this just to help keep in place while the glue was drying. It just made it easier to keep everything lined up, keep it from moving, and allowed me to start sanding on this a little bit sooner. After about an hour to an hour and a half of hand sanding on this trim, um, getting the edges cleaned up, getting the profiles rounded over to match, I was able to actually start moving on to the final sanding for the box itself and getting it ready to finish. Here I'm just using the sander to round over the primary edges just to soften them up a little bit, just so they're not as sharp. To match the drawers on the cabinet that I put together for my drawing stuff, having walnut dowels through the front of the face and extending into the drawer. The easiest way that I found to get this lined up and figure out where these dowels were going to go was to mark them on the drawer face, use my centering pins for the dowels to mark the front of the drawer and be able to line up where I needed to drill so that everything was all nice and neat. And with a couple of soft thumps, I was able to get the indent into the front of the drawer so that I know where I need to drill and get these lined up. With the holes drilled through the front of the drawer box, I can be able to actually get the dowels in place, get those glued in, and get the drawer front ready to glue in place and attach permanently. The only part of this I wasn't quite sure on how I was going to put it together and what to do with was for the drawer that I wanted to put inside this upper triangle. I ended up deciding that it was best to build more or less of a box that the drawer would slide into, and just created a frame for the box for the drawer that would end up accommodating that space. And here's the drawer that I built for that. I actually cut dovetails in it, and I can't believe I actually did not see this through. I'm pretty sure that none of you have ever done anything like this, where you have a drawer that isn't fully assembled, that you slide in place to see if it's actually going to fit before you glue it together, and then realize you have no way to get the drawer out of the slot that it was put into. Had I not put the back on the triangle part, it would have been a lot easier. I could have just simply pushed it from the back and slid it out. But I had to grab a dental tool that I have in my drawer for picking out bark, inclusions, stuff like that, and pop the front of it off, and then get the drawer out, put it back together, and get it ready to glue up. I've come to decide when it comes to woodworking, I am a glutton for punishment. Originally, I was going to use some metal drawer pulls that we have, but I just didn't like the way they looked. They would have been way too big for the smaller drawer. And I happened to have a couple of drawer pulls that I designed and put together for my wife's desk left over, and felt that would actually look better in the long run. So, with the drawers fully glued together and put together, I now have to route out the slot for those drawer pulls, get them cleaned up, and get them in place. And here it is with the finish applied and getting ready to put on a second coat and then move it inside.
Here you can see the cabinet in place, my computer case is on it. It works quite well. It does exactly what I wanted it to do. The dimensions turned out to be a little bit off, but I can definitely live with this, and it will eventually match the rest of the furniture that I have planned for the office. At the moment, we have everything set up in what is intended to be our guest bedroom. Once we're able to reclaim the other bedroom that I can turn into the office, everything will be moved into there and set up a little bit differently. But here you can see the desk that I built for my wife. It was one of the projects that I did at school. It turned out quite nice. I'm very happy with the combination of black walnut and hickory. The cabinet that I put together for my computer is black walnut and maple. And as you can see, it's designed to match the shelf that I put together for the cabinet I put together for my drawing and art stuff. So eventually the drafting table and the desk and filing cabinet will be built to match, and styling may be a little bit different for each one, but it should look pretty good in the long run. This was a lot of fun. Used some different techniques with joinery that I have not used before. It's adapted from a Chinese style of chair, and it's made entirely out of black walnut. The pins that you see to keep the joinery together is actually hickory. But it turned out quite well. I'm very happy with the end result of this, and like I said, it was a lot of fun. I didn't get to film this, obviously, being in school. A lot of privacy concerns, and some of my fellow students would prefer not to be on camera, so anything that I do there is completely separate. I have already signed up to take the furniture making class again in the fall, so I'll be doing that. Sounds like we may be building a patio bench, which would be awesome, and learning some new techniques and developing some different ways to work with wood. But anyway, this is where I'm at so far. Additional pieces will be coming. I'm trying to figure out how modular I want to do this. I want something that's going to be easy to move around. But this setup for the desk was supposed to be temporary, but it's ended up being a little more long-term than what I had anticipated and wanted. But hopefully over the next year I can be able to get this changed. But I hope this gives you some additional ideas of what you can do. I appreciate you taking the time to watch the video, and I will see you on the next one.